We're lost. We've been walking for 6 hours. We don't know where the car is. Yeah, where the fuck am I?
Okay, a little bit of a flirt for the drama there. I'm Christine, welcome. This is the third video in the Desert Southwest series where we're going to cover one of my absolute all-time favorite days of photography that I've had, well, ever. You're looking at Mesquite Flat Dunes in Death Valley National Park. Starting out at Furnace Creek Campground, we made our way up to the Harmony Borax Works, which was a borax plant all the way back in 1884. Really cool to see the equipment, but I had my eyes set further up the valley. That took us to our next destination known as the Devil's Cornfield. Interesting in its own right, it was really just a preview of what was going to come. The dunes. This is easily the most accessible dune field in the entirety of the national park. Some of the sand dunes reach up to 140 feet in height. On the south side of the dune field, you'll see this parking lot here. We decided to set up shop over here and wait for the light to be absolutely perfect for photography. And yes, I promised in the last episode a lunch reveal, so here we are having soup, beer, and hummus while looking out on the dunes. So yeah, game plan. I knew I wanted to capture the sun setting so I could get those really exquisite shadows, and then I wanted to capture astrophotography, so stars over the dunes at night. About that opening, I couldn't help myself. Kristen was making all this hilarious footage, so I had to do something with it.
We haven't had any alcohol since 10:30.
So let's say one day you get out to Mesquite Flat Dunes and you want to take photos. What do? What we thought was best to do was to avoid any sort of footprints in photography. They're kind of distracting, and most of the people will be going from the parking lot directly north up to this main dune here. So what we did instead was we cut over to the east and then cut north to avoid where most people had already gone. Carrying out our plan, we cut across some of the dunes and found these sort of dry mud beds. These are so much easier to walk than the dunes themselves, so we just followed one north and east for a ways. Just with how dry the ground is, you get these really cool patterns all throughout it. And then if you reach down and pick up some of it, it's just bizarrely brittle, so it was kind of fun to pick up and play with.
Came down that one, climbed up this big dune. There's the second one. We're going over there.
We're maybe close to about a mile into the dune field at this point, so you can see the footprints on the ground starting to thin out. Still a fair amount though, and that's not really what you want whenever you're picking out a composition, so we were going further in. This is where I'm starting to feel pretty confident in the whole plan overall. The sun was starting to get a little bit lower, so we got the timing right. We're getting further into the dune field, starting to see less and less footprints, and I'm starting to scope out some compositions that I'm really gonna like. We keep hiking in and everything just keeps getting better and better the further we go. The lower the sun is, the deeper the shadows are, the more we can see the textures in the sand dunes. Getting a little bit more difficult hiking at this point though. Dunes are much higher this far into the dune field, so it takes a fair bit of effort. Going through and doing the edits for these, just with how cool the textures were looking, I really enjoyed monochrome edits, so I'm going to show colored images and then monochromes as well for a number of these. I did 4 larger prints from this shoot. This was one of the photos that I printed and put up on my living room wall. I just really loved this massive slope and the way the sun was hitting it. The shadows just gave so much depth to all the textures throughout the dune. Any other photographers watching, highly would recommend it if you haven't done any larger prints for yourself. Put your own artwork up in your home. It's rewarding to see, makes you feel good, and brings up good memories. This particular image ended up being a fair amount of work just because the foreground, the midground, and then the sky were 3 separate images in a focus stack. Automation really did not like the sand dunes, so this ended up being mostly manually done. Another one that I had printed, this one in a black and white. A little bit more hiking, and then I came across a lone set of footprints that made for a nice subject in and of themselves. To isolate them a bit more amongst the dunes, I ended up switching out to a 16 by 35 while I'd been using a 70 by 200 up until this point. We found a nice ridgeline that honestly had photogenic views at about 270 degrees, that was right about here, and decided that this would be the perfect spot to sit and wait for the sun to set. All said and done, I took about 344 exposures over the course of the afternoon. These are just some of my favorites. I'm gonna let it roll out for like a minute and a half here. If you see any that you like, you want as a computer background, drop me a message on the contact page of my website. I'll send you one for free. I want this YouTube channel to be about sharing the joy and love of photography with others, and to me, that means making the images accessible. So, just capturing this moment in a nutshell. We're out on Mesquite Flat Dunes in Death Valley National Park. Sun has just set. Walked probably about how many miles would you say? 2 miles? 2. Yeah? Kristen's got the music. We've got brewskis. Camera equipment. It's cool out here. Really enjoying the business. Everything's grand. And it's quiet. Now that the sun was down, I took a few blue hour photos and just sat, relaxed, enjoyed the views, and waited for the stars to come out. It was surprising to me in taking these photos that even in Death Valley there was still light pollution. That glow on the horizon is not from the sun setting, it's actually from Los Angeles. And then looking further to the south, that glow there in this unedited photo, that's from Las Vegas. I had mentioned before doing some blue hour photography, that gave me a bit more creative control in making a composite image. I ended up taking this one here because I really like the detail in the sands, and then this astrophotography image just because I like the stars, and combined them to result in this final image here. After a good time shooting, we still had to find our way out of the dunes. Honestly, one of the wildest things I've probably experienced. Really glad I wasn't out here alone, because it would have been so spooky being out here by yourself. If you're going to try doing something like this, don't be an idiot, and definitely have a plan in place and some basic navigation skills. Before the sunset, we marked the compass direction where we had parked relative to where we were. Additionally, we knew if we went south, eventually we'd end up hitting the roadway that ended up connecting to the parking lot. There's a rule of thumb in this kind of situation where you say 1 flashlight is no flashlight and 2 flashlights is 1 flashlight. That's to say, you need a backup. You're really not going to be able to see very far, but what was helpful to us in navigating is that the parking lot had some very reflective signs that we could point the light to and see the reflection to navigate towards. 2 miles of hiking in a dark desert later, we made it back to the van. Suffice to say, fun check, fun check. Happily, after a pretty late night, camping wasn't too far away. The next day we made our way up to Mosaic Canyon for a nice morning hike. Didn't really have any video from this one in the reserves, but here's a few exposures. This was mostly a driving day for us, with us heading north to our next campsite. The valley provided sublime views the entire way north. The next morning we got to visit Ubehebe Crater, which is between 2,000 and 7,000 years old and was formed by a volcanic eruption in the valley. To our surprise, our visit was a little wet.
Can you believe we're in the desert and it's pouring rain? We're in the desert. I thought this was the desert.
Awesome to see, but the camera equipment stayed in the van just given all the rain. Not really the best conditions for cameras. After visiting the crater, you might remember from the last episode, we had our hearts set on getting some burgers. This time, we were successful in Panamint Springs.
So anyway, we just got a burger and some beers, and now we're on Mars. It's the longest, straightest route ever up the mountains. It's like 50 degrees down here, it's like 33 up there.
And long straight roads in the middle of nowhere make for nice subjects, so of course I got a picture from both angles. This is just about it for us. Our final day in Death Valley National Park. We really enjoyed the drive across the mountain pass on our way out and decided that we wanted to spend just a little bit more time here just taking in the scenery. So we stopped at a place that we had already been to before in the park, and that was Zabriskie Point. With the rain and low clouds over the valley, everything had a very different feel from the previous time we had visited the spot. We didn't have too far to go before we ended up camping that night, so we spent about 2.5 hours here just being lightly rained on and taking in the views. It was so worth it just to see the light change and the different perspective with how everything looked with the rain and being wet. Occasionally the sun would peek out from behind the clouds, just sort of illuminating the earth, and just made for this fantastic contrast between illuminated ground and cloudy skies. With enough patience, we eventually had a sight that I was really hoping to capture. A single shaft of light shooting through the clouds and reaching the valley floor below. Since I was working with my 70x200, this was 24 images in total for this panorama, a lot of dynamic range, so it was a fair bit of work with the editing. That was basically it for this trip. We spent one night over in Lost Wages, which was not really my vibe before heading back to the East Coast. This whole series was referred to as a retrospective because it was exactly that. All of the footage, all of the photos. This is before I planned on even making a YouTube channel, so if you enjoyed this, more things to come. Honestly, I should be packing my bags instead of recording this audio right now. Another trip on the agenda, going out to Great Sand Dunes National Park, Monument Valley, and then passing through Canyonlands National Park, particularly in the Needles District. It's going to be a lot more in line with my other videos where it's live action shooting rather than retrospective, so if that sounds interesting to you, be sure to subscribe. I'll see you around. Bye.